They burned her home for loving a Cheyenne man. He rode back alone to finish what they started. Cheyenne, that savage escaped the holding pin. Do not shoot. He is wounded. Elenina's voice cracked as she stumbled through the brush, arms thrown wide in front of the rifles. Four men stood near the river's edge, guns raised, eyes full of fire. A dark figure lay crumpled in the reeds. A young Cheyenne man, blood trailing from his shoulder into the mud. His chest rose and fell in shallow gasps. I say do not shoot. Elena shouted again, louder this time, planting herself between the man and the barrels. Her skirts were soaked from the riverbank, her boots sinking into wet earth. He's one of them, one man barked, jaw clenched. They stole our supplies, slaughtered livestock. That's not true. You do not know what happened. You just need someone to blame, she snapped, voice shaking with fear. And something fiercer, conviction. The man scoffed, but the others lowered their rifles slightly, glancing between one another. It was not hesitation born of mercy, but of uncertainty. Elena turned to the man on the ground. His eyes blinked open, dark and wild with pain. He tried to rise, groaned, then collapsed again. She crouched beside him, pressing her hand to his wound. You'll be all right, she whispered. Just trust me. The men behind her shifted, but said nothing. She did not wait for permission. With a strength she did not know she had, Elena hauled his arm over her shoulder and dragged him away from the riverbank. One step at a time, teeth grit against the strain, she took him to the old hunting shack, hers technically, though it had not been used since her brother died in the war. Hidden in the cottonwoods by the bend. It was where she went to be alone, to read, to forget. Now it would become a place of hiding. She cleaned the wound with boiled water, wrapped it in linen. The fever came quickly. For 3 nights, he muttered in his language, his forehead burning, body convulsing with chills. Elena sat beside him, feeding broth between clenched teeth, changing soaked cloths, whispering words he could not understand. On the 4th day, he opened his eyes and stayed awake. You saved me, he rasped. You fell into the river, she replied. I did not want you to drown. I am Tokala, he said slowly, English clumsy but clear. Elena, she answered, then after a pause, why were they chasing you? He was silent a moment before saying, they believe I stole, killed. But I did not. White traitors, they lie. They break treaty. Then point to my people. She believed him. She did not know why. Maybe it was the way he said her name, like it meant something. In the days that followed, Tokala regained strength. He helped chop wood one-handed. He sat beside her during quiet hours, asking about words in English, pointing to objects, repeating them. She showed him her books. He showed her how to braid grass into cord. The silence between them was not empty. It grew full of unspoken trust, of glances held too long, of warmth in places no fire touched. But outside the shack, the world grew colder. People in the village began to talk. Elena had missed Sunday prayer. She had been seen carrying bandages into the woods. Her father had warned her once already. She knew she should let Tokawa go, that keeping him hidden was dangerous. But each time she looked into his eyes, she saw not a savage, but a man who had never been given the chance to speak his truth. Then came the footstep. One morning, while collecting herbs, she spotted men tracking near the shack. One of them her cousin rifle slung over his back. She ran faster than she ever had. When she burst into the shack, Tokala was already standing, holding his shirt in one hand, his eyes hard. They come? He asked. Yes, she gasped. You have to go. He did not move. I will go, he said softly. If it means they will not burn you too. Elena's breath caught. They will do it anyway. They both stood in silence. Then she stepped forward and placed a hand over his wound. Now nearly healed. Not yet, she whispered. Please, not yet. But fate did not wait. That night, flames lit the edge of the woods. The shack burned fast. Elena screamed. Tokala ran into the trees. And from the ashes a promise remained, one forged not by law but by choice. The promise of return. Elena sat by the fire holding a half-burned twig in one hand and drawing crooked letters in the dirt floor of the shack. This, she said, pointing, is the letter E for Elena. Tokala watched her, eyes narrowed with focus. He repeated the shape with a careful hand, brow furrowed in concentration. Then he pointed to himself. T, he said for Tokala. She smiled. You learn fast. He shook his head gently, then tapped her book. Learn slow, want right. He reached for the page she had opened and traced the printed words with a reverent fingertip when she laughed softly. It was not mockery but wonder. In return, Tokala pulled a pouch from his satchel. Faded leather stitched with blue and white thread. He opened it slowly, revealing a folded square of hide. Unraveling it, he showed her a series of hand-stitched symbols, circles within circles, lines reaching outward like sunrays, animals with sharp hooves and curved horns. This, he said, pointing to one with long feathers, means journey, walk long. She leaned closer, her fingers brushing his. And this, she asked, pointing to a sun-shaped pattern. Family, warm place. He looked at her then. You understand? She nodded, her throat tightened. They began to speak like that. Half words, half gestures, full meaning. He showed her how to roast corn. Inside its husk buried beneath hot coals. She taught him how to write his name in crooked English script. He offered her a carved charm for protection. She gave him a torn scrap of her shawl to wrap his wound. Their hands met more often than needed. Their silences became spaces filled with comfort, not distance. One evening, as the sky deepened to indigo, and the wind hissed softly through the cracks in the cabin walls, Elena handed Tala a tin cup of tea. He took it, nodding, thanks, and instead of drinking, set it down gently between them. Then, without speaking, he reached forward and took her hand. It was calloused from gathering wood, cold from the night air. He turned it over in his palm, examining the lines like they were sacred. And then he did something she did not expect. He brought her hand to his chest, pressing her fingers against his heart. The drum beat beneath was steady, strong, he whispered. Elena tilted her head. What does that mean? He looked at her, eyes softer than they had ever been. Elena in Cheyenne, her breath caught. She had been called many things in her life. Foolish girl, blacksmith's burden, spinster, traitor, but never her name like that, not wrapped in reverence. Slowly, she brought her other hand to his face, fingers brushing the scar on his temple. Taka, she said fully, freely, for the first time. He smiled, small and quiet. Outside, wind danced through the trees. Inside, they leaned forward, their lips met gently at first, more wonder than passion. But then the closeness deepened like two rivers merging, unable to remain separate. The kiss was not rushed. It was a kind of promise. By the time they parted, the fire had burned low. Neither of them felt the cold. That night, snow fell silently over the woods, coating ash, covering sins. But inside the small cabin, warmth bloomed, not from flame, but from the unspoken vow in their embrace. In a world where language had often been used to wound, they had found a way to speak without it. And for the first time, Elena did not feel like she had to explain her heart. She only had to offer it, and he without question took it gently in his own. They came at dawn, not with warning, but with fire. Elena was not home. She had gone to fetch water from the creek beyond the ridge, unaware that a boy from the village had followed her the evening before, seen her disappear into the woods and return near sunrise. Always alone, always from the same direction. They believed she was consorting with danger. Cheyenne, a killer, they whispered. By the time the first smoke reached the edge of the trees, she was already running. Flames licked the roof beams. Her home, the small cottage her mother once baked bread in, where her father forged iron, where she had read books by candle light, was collapsing in on itself. She screamed, but the voices around her rose louder. She hid him, a traitor to her own blood. Rough hands grabbed her. Someone slapped her. A boot struck her side. The crowd did not wait for her to speak. Truth was not what they wanted. They wanted retribution. Farther out, hidden in the brush, Tokala had been watching. He saw the fire. He saw Alina fall beneath fists, but he could not get to her. A group of Cheyenne warriors, his own kin, had circled behind him. They had tracked his scent, seen his footprints too close to the white settlements. He did not resist when they seized him. His eyes never left the plume of smoke rising in the sky. "Alina," he whispered. "You broke the boundary," one of the elders said, binding his wrists. "The fire you lit must now be doused with your absence." They forced him to ride east away from her. Back in the village, Alina was thrown into the blacksmith's barn. Her own father turned the lock. "You'll marry the Reverend by week's end," he said through the door. He lost his wife. "Hell beat that foolishness out of you." She collapsed against the hay, bloody and silent. The next night, under the cover of stars and mist, Tokala escaped. He did not run far. He returned to the charred frame of her home, now a skeleton of wood and ash. Beneath the ruin, he found a blackened kettle, half a scorched shawl. He pressed it to his face and inhaled the ghost of her scent. She was not there. He searched for hours before he found the barn. There was no key, only a thick beam holding the doors shut and guards nearby. Too many. He could not speak with her, but he could leave a message. He took a sharp rock from the creek. Then on the earth outside the barn wall where the morning light might reach, he knelt. With his own blood drawn from the gash in his shoulder, he drew a river. Then he added 2 leaves side by side, drifting the same way, a memory. Their beginning, he did not wait to be caught. Before dawn, he disappeared again, this time not in defeat, but in decision. Inside the barn, Alina awoke to the sound of footsteps retreating. She crawled to the wall, saw the symbol, knew his hand had made it. A sob broke through her lips. He was alive. He had seen her, and he had not run. Later, a stable boy, sympathetic and silent, slid open the door enough to let in a sliver of sunlight. He saw the image in the dirt and shivered. "What does it mean?" he whispered. Alina placed a hand on the drawing. "He's coming back," she said softly. "But not with war, with truth." The boy nodded, though he did not understand. He only knew that something powerful had passed between those two. Something stronger than bloodlines, stronger than hatred, stronger even than fire. And as Alina stared at the symbol, she made a promise of her own. She would wait, not in silence, but in memory. Not in fear, but in strength. No matter what chains they placed on her, she would not forget. Because love, once lit, does not burn out like wood. It lingers in ash, in scars, and in the river that still carried their names. Alina was released 3 days after the barn incident. Not because they believed her, but because keeping her locked up stirred unease even among the cruel. The town let her go, but not her shame. They did not speak to her. They did not greet her. Her father turned his back when she passed. Mothers pulled children closer. Shopkeepers refused her coins. Her name was now spit like a curse, the Cheyenne's woman. She found shelter at the edge of town with an old widow named Mags, who lived alone by the creek, and remembered what it was to lose a son in a war she never agreed with. Alina swept floors, gathered firewood, and scrubbed the wash in return for bread and a place to sleep. Her hands cracked, her eyes hollowed. But every evening when Mag slept, Alina walked to the grove. There, where the trees bowed and the ground echoed with promise. She began to rebuild the hut. The small shelter was not for hiding. It was for waiting. She gathered rocks for a fire pit, restacked the beams, and wove a new thatched roof from straw and vine. Inside she placed no bed, only a rug and a small table. On it she laid the 2 burned pages from her mother's book of poems. Charred edges but legible still. Sometimes children followed her, curious, unburdened by their parents' hatred. They asked for stories. She gave them folk tales, songs without a homeland, riddles with no answers. They laughed. She smiled. One afternoon at the market, Elena saw a flash of leather tied in a loop twisted in the Cheyenne way dyed with ashwood and berry. It was hanging from a saddle horn. She looked around, heart racing, but no rider claimed it. She touched the leather, warm, as if freshly handled, then walked away. That evening, back at the grove, she found a bundle behind the roots of the old cottonwood, wrapped in oilskin. Inside was the red handkerchief she had once tied around Tokala's wrist when his wound reopened. It was clean, sewn along the torn edge in tiny, precise stitches threaded with red. She pressed it to her face. He was alive and close. She lit no fire that night, just sat by the window, waiting. The moon rose, and with it footsteps. He came from the shadows, taller than she remembered, wrapped in a cloak of quiet and dust. He did not speak, only stepped forward, one by one, laying things on the stone table, a pouch of cornmeal, a bag of seeds, a book, its cover etched with symbols of the Cheyenne alphabet. She touched the items, then looked up. Tears spilled, but she did not sob. This was not surprise. This was recognition. "You came," she whispered. Tala nodded. His voice was low. "I said I would." She clutched the book in his hand. He did not flinch. She said, "They still watch me." He said, "Let them. They will not welcome you. I did not come for them." He stepped closer, cupping her face gently. "We do not run now. I will speak what you cannot. You will live what I could not. Now we both live." Elena leaned into his palm. She had lost a home. He had lost a name. But in this place, between scorched soil and rebuilt roof, something new had taken root. Not in defiance, but in quiet, unwavering choice. The Kala did not come back with warriors. He came with parchment. He came with names, stolen items, and letters written in English, translated with effort and pain. He came with truth. It took weeks. He walked the plains, crossed rivers, and sat with elders of other tribes who had once traded peacefully with the settlers. He pieced together what had really happened. The night the cattle were killed, the stolen goods, the whispers fed to white ears by men who profited from fear. It was not Cheyenne hands that poisoned wells or cut fences. It was white men with faces known too well in that very town. Men who had been losing contracts, who saw Elena's father as an ally of the savages and used the oldest weapon of all, lies. T carried a bundle on his back when he returned to the village. No horse, an overdraw. Just the same quiet presence and eyes that had seen too much to be afraid. He did not go to the mayor first. He went to the baker's wife, who once gave Elena a peach pie on her birthday. He handed her a spool of blue thread. "Your daughter dropped this when they raided. She tried to hide under a cart." The woman covered her mouth. Her daughter had cried for days when it went missing. Next, Tokala visited the widow who ran the general store. He laid down a silver brooch, bent, scratched, but unmistakably hers. "Your husband traded this, but he never received it. It was stolen from the wagon before delivery." Her hands trembled. Each house he brought something, a child's button, a torn ledger, a broken watch, names matched, dates lined up. He spoke gently in halting English, never accusing, only revealing. People began to gather behind him. Whispers turned into silence. At the last house, an old woman with cloudy eyes held a tattered cloth to her chest. This was my grandson's. I embroidered this for him before the winter drive. They told me he lost it." Tokala shook his head. "He did not lose it. They took it from your barn." The woman began to cry, not because of the cloth, but because for the first time someone had returned something, not for gain, but because it was right. By the time Tokala reached the town center, a crowd had followed. Elena stood at the edge of it, unsure, eyes locked on him. He looked different now, weathered, scarred from exile, but radiant in a way grief could not dim. A warrior who had fought not with war, but with memory. He did not look at her. Not yet. He stepped up the wooden porch of the town elder's house. The elder opened the door, startled to find silence behind Tokala instead of violence. Toa bowed slightly. Then he unrolled the bundle, maps, lists, and a journal page in the handwriting of one of the men who had fled west. When the lies began to unravel, the elder glanced at it, recognized the script. Tokala said, "I came back not for revenge, not for land." He looked over the crowd, his voice steady, "But because when you burned her house, you thought you burned our story." He met the elder's eyes again. "You were wrong." No one spoke. Not a foot shuffled. Tala held up a thin chain broken at the clasp. "This belonged to her mother. You found it in the ashes. You kept it." The elder's jaw tightened. Tokala placed the chain on the porch rail, then softly, "Do not let promises burn like timber. If you let one girl's truth die, the next one learns silence." He turned and walked back down the steps. No one stopped him. He passed Elena on his way out. He did not speak, but he pressed something into her hand, a folded scrap of parchment, smelling faintly of smoke and cedar. Inside, a sketch of the river where they had met. 2 leaves drawn in charcoal, floating in the same direction. Elena's throat closed around them. No one knew what to say. But for the first time, they did not look at her like she was a traitor. They looked at her like someone who had told the truth when no one else dared him, like a man who needed no weapon to change a town's heart. The Choi by the river no longer felt like a hiding place. It had become a home. Elena planted herbs by the window. Tala repaired the roof with cedar bark and clay. In the morning, he cooked corn cakes. At dusk, she read aloud from an English primer as they sat on the porch, legs brushing beneath worn wool blankets. The village did not speak often, but they came. A mother with a child burning with fever. A man with a wound that had festered too long. They came quietly, always stopping a few steps before the door, as if unsure this place allowed entry. Elena never turned anyone away. He ground roots into paste, showed mothers how to cool a cloth with willow bark. Tokala handed over small bundles of dried mint and chamomile from the shelves he built. No one said thank you at first, but they returned. The girl once called traitor had become a healer. The man once called enemy had become the one they trusted with their baby's coughs. At night, Elena would light one oil lamp, and Tokala would read by her shoulder, his finger slowly following each word. She taught him to spell river, leaf, and her name. He taught her how to recognize owl feathers, how to track where deer sleep, how to whisper a blessing into smoke before it left the chimney. There were no declarations. No one asked what they were to each other, but they shared the same bowl of beans, the same blanket on cold nights, the same silence that only love could make feel full. One morning, after a long week of rain and colds and mending, a boy about 6 years old wandered up the slope. His nose ran. His boots were mismatched. He held out a rock with a hole in it. "I found it for her," he said, pointing to Elena. She bent down, smiled, and took it. As if it were gold. Tokala watched her with quiet joy. The boy wrinkled his nose and asked, "Are you her husband?" Tala blinked, unsure how to answer. The boy tilted his head. "You live here? You fix stuff? She feeds you? That's what a husband is, right?" A laugh escaped Elena before she could stop it. Tokala crouched slowly beside the boy. "I am someone who once fell into her hands," he said gently, "and never wanted to be let go." The boy nodded solemnly. "That sounds right." He ran off. Elena stood still, the words echoing around her more tender than any vow. That night, she carved his name into the wooden doorframe, Tokala. Underneath she etched hers, Elena. The two names side by side above the spot where he had once fallen bleeding into her care and now returned whole. No one had written their names like that before, not on paper, not in law, but carved in cedar where the wind could touch them, where anyone passing might read not who they were supposed to be, but who they chose to be together. The summer came harsh and early. The river that once carried Tala's wounded body had receded into a trickle. The earth cracked in spiderweb lines, and the air turned dry enough to split lips and splinter wood. Crops failed all across the valley, but none more than on the small patch of soil that Elena and Tokala had nurtured with bare hands and borrowed hope. Each morning, Tokala rose before the sun to draw water from a shallow well they had dug by guess and instinct. He rationed it carefully. 3 ladles for the corn, 2 for the herbs, 1 for the flowering bush he refused to let die. By the time he returned inside, his shirt would be soaked with sweat, but his hands still dry and shaking from exhaustion. Elena begged him to rest. He shook his head, smiled faintly, and kissed her temple without answering. At night, she paced while he slept. She combed through every book she owned, searching for ways to trap dew, build a shade frame, preserve heat. When the pages offered nothing new, she packed the books, those that once told her who she was, and walked into town. She came back with a sack of rice and a bottle of oil, her boots torn from the walk and her eyes dull from bargaining. He scolded her without raising his voice. "You traded your books." "They were just pages," she said. "You and the garden are my story now." Tokala gave up portions of his food, feeding the chickens and goats with smiles he no longer had energy to explain. He grew thinner. The bones in his hands showed more. His braid lost its shine. She knew it before he admitted it. He was starving himself for them. One evening, she found him collapsed near the well. His hands were muddy, his breath shallow. "Nina," he murmured, not opening his eyes. She knelt, cradled his head. Tears spilled silently. She brought water to his lips, cooled his face with a damp cloth, and whispered as he drifted in and out. "You kept your promise," she said, brushing his hair back with trembling fingers. "You came back. You built a home. You protected what they tried to burn. Now let me keep mine," he stirred faintly. "What promise?" he mumbled. "To never let you fall alone again." She stayed up the night holding his hand. Around midnight, clouds gathered, slow, deliberate, like someone uncertain of their welcome. By dawn, the wind shifted. The smell came first, wet and deep, like the breath of the earth itself returning, then a drop, then another. The sky cracked open. Rain fell in heavy sheets, turning dust into mud, washing ash from leaf and stone. The roof leaked in one corner. Chickens flapped and shrieked with wild delight. But all Elena could do was laugh. She ran out barefoot, face turned skyward. When the water kissed her skin, it felt like the whole world was apologizing. Tala woke to the sound of her laughter and rain drumming the roof. He tried to sit up but groaned. She ran to him, soaked, radiant, half sobbing. "You brought it," she said. "You brought it back." "A collection of what?" "The rain, the hope." He smiled weakly. "I just planted things. You gave them a reason to grow." That afternoon, as rain settled into the soil, a tiny shoot emerged from the edge of their garden. One stubborn green tip poking through the cracked brown earth. A flower or something trying to be. Elena crouched beside it, brushed mud from its leaf, and whispered, "You are not alone." The promise had endured the fire, the snow, and now the drought. They had no wealth. They had no title. But they had this life. Stubborn and quiet, refusing to die in a place the world swore could not bloom. That night, she lay beside Tkela, hand on his chest, listening to the steady beat under her palm. "You are mine," she said softly. "And I am not afraid of any season." They did not leave. Years passed in the Choi by the river, once a secret place for wounds and whispers, became a home filled with laughter, lessons, and seasons measured not by pain, but by planting, harvest, and the quiet joy of knowing someone would always return. Akala and Elena grew older. Their hands hardened with years of labor, their backs bent with time, but their eyes still lit up each morning when they found each other across the table, the field, or beside the fire. They had no children by blood, but they raised a boy who came from neither of them. He had been abandoned during a storm, left at the edge of the river, wrapped in a wool blanket. Takola found him. Elena named him. They called him Jonah. Jonah learned both tongues. At night, Tokala taught him the stars in Cheyenne. By day, Elena read him the stories of the world. He grew strong, thoughtful, and curious. And every time someone asked him who his parents were, he would answer, the woman who healed a warrior and the man who came back for her. One spring, the town received a notice from the government. Plans to build a dam would flood the entire riverside, including the land where Tokala and Elena had lived all these years. The town was no longer the place that had once burned Elena's house. People had changed. Or maybe it was time that had softened them. Or truth. Word spread fast. Petitions filled. Voices rose. They cannot build on that land. The old shopkeeper said, it's where she saved him. It's where he returned with peace instead of revenge. The mayor, who had once refused to look Elena in the eye, stood at the town hall and said, some places carry more than water. That land carries a promise. And so the plan was halted not because of law, but because of memory, because a whole town chose to remember not the shame, but the redemption. On the outer stone of their choy, Tokala carved with his own hand. We did not come from the same place, but we chose a life that needed no road away. Elena traced the words each morning. She said it felt like roots, like something stronger than time. Years later, when Jonah grew into a man and moved to the edge of the next valley, he still returned every Sunday with his own children. He brought them books and beads. He told them how his mother once fought the silence of a whole town with nothing but kindness. How his father never raised a hand to destroy but still changed 100 hearts. When Elena's hair turned white, she spent most of her time in the garden. Tokala carved her a bench from cedar. When he passed before her peacefully in sleep, she sat there for days, fingers brushing the flowers he once planted for her. She buried him beneath the hawthorn tree, the one they had grown from a single sprout rescued during the fire. On the stone, she wrote, he kept every word, and I never wanted to leave. Years later, when she passed, Jonah placed her beside him. No preacher spoke, just Jonah and his children and the river. They built a small fence, not to keep people out, but to mark the place where love had refused to be erased. Every spring, flowers bloom near the stone. Every year, someone new asks, who lived here, and someone always answers. Two people who never asked permission to love and never needed to. If this story touched your heart, the way two lives once divided by fear found their way to a quiet forever beside a river, then you're exactly where you need to be. Here at Wild West Love Stories, we believe in love that crosses borders, heals wounds, and holds on when the world lets go. From dusty plains to fire-lit cabins, we'll keep telling the tales that history left behind, but the heart never forgot. Subscribe now to Wild West Love Stories because some stories don't fade, they echo.